The title of my presentation is The Value of Elephants, Rands and Cents. A little bit of background. I have been extremely fortunate in that I have been able to live for almost 20 years with and amongst elephants at a private game reserve up in Hoedspruit. And I'm going to steal Joyce's amazing title, which is The Coming of Age of Elephants, because I certainly feel that that's my life story. I lived, loved, and lost with those elephants. And through our immunocontraceptive program, I was deeply embedded in the behavior of those elephants and had to report on that. So the scientists will tell you that the way in which animal sentience or cognizance is measured is through a number of tests, including the mirror self-recognition test, the ability of an animal to be able to use tools, its comprehension of itself in space and time. And whilst those may be the scientific foundations of how to clarify that, I would challenge anybody to just spend time with elephants in the wild and just see how they interact with their families. And I think in the face of being very anthropomorphic, we would say that they are far much more like us than we would care to imagine.
Could we get the overhead up, please?
Okay, there we go.
There you go. Thank you.
Okay. So moving on. Okay, so in terms of South Africa and its elephants, we have about 25,000 elephants in South Africa, some of which live in the Kruger National Park, as we know, and the rest in private and provincial reserves. In 1968 to 1994, South Africa undertook culling in the Kruger National Park, and in 1995, a moratorium was then placed on the culling. In 2006, the then minister convened a scientific roundtable, basically because there seemed to be little evidence to suggest that there was actually an urgent need for a cull in Kruger, and that there were differentiated needs that were, or solutions that were needed to manage elephants. And this led to the 2007 assessment. So an assessment is basically a social process by which scientific information is made available to policymakers. And this assessment was the product of 45 institutions, 62 authors, 3 review editions, 73 reviewers. It spanned a year, had 3 drafts and 2 reviews. So it was a really comprehensive process. And there are many of us on the panel and in the audience that were part of that assessment process. So out of the assessment, there were 2 important publications that arose. The first was the booklet, the Elephant Management, which is a scientific assessment for elephants in South Africa, and that was printed in 2008. And then the National Norms and Standards of Elephant Management in South Africa. So the elephant assessment delved into a wide variety of topics. One of them was the economic value of elephants. So when we talk about the value of elephants, most people automatically jump to the rands of elephants. And the chapter that was authored by James Blichnout, basically, if you look at the summary, a whole bunch of words jump out, and that is the total economic value of elephants, the damage that they cause, income from ivory, their conservation value, the economic value, their value as trophy animals, markets, and then of course countries such as Namibia and others that actually use elephants for consumptive purposes. And so that's in a nutshell the key essence of what came out of that. Just flagging, you probably won't be able to see the values on the screen, but the take-home message from this slide is basically that when looking at consumptive versus non-consumptive use of elephants, and remember this was done in 2008, basically the take-home message is that elephants are worth much more alive than dead. And so there have been a series of advancements and developments with regards to this. And so in the literature today, you can find much more updated figures. But I think it's pertinent to say that this is a topic that's been on the cards since 2008. So it's not something that is new. Then when we look at the different values of elephants, the chapter also in the assessment that was authored by Wayne Twine and Hector Magomi looked at interactions with people and elephants. And there's only a very small section that basically evaluates the other values of elephants. So now you're definitely not going to be able to read that, but essentially it looks at the aesthetic values, the cultural values, the ecological values, the empathetic values of elephants, their mere existence, their recreational value, and their scientific value. And it delves into the relevance of those values for elephants. So my colleague Antoinette, I'm sure, is going to be talking about that in a lot further detail, as this is the subject of her PhD. So I'm not going to steal her thunder, but just again to highlight that we have had this thread, certainly in South Africa, thinking about different values of elephants. Coming back to the norms and standards, the norms and standards were and are a very progressive piece of legislation, certainly for South Africa and for the continent, because it determines the way in which we manage elephants. And within this document, there are guiding principles. And what is really refreshing about these guiding principles is that it talks specifically about elephants and their need to be managed in a way in which minimizes stress. It talks about elephants as being intelligent, having strong family bonds, being highly socialized groups, having a charismatic and iconic status, that when it comes to decision-making, it should be scientific-based, but that we should safeguard their natural behaviors. So it also goes so far as to include the word sentient within, a legislated piece of documentation. So I think this is critical. The norms and standards are being revised, and again, a number of us on the panel and in the audience are part of that process, and it's good to see that the fundamentals of the guiding principles will remain intact. Okay, so in terms of the literature, we have also seen that there has been a challenge in traditional thinking and looking at animals as being mere than just cohorts that we share our existence with. We know that there have been a number of studies by Go, Bosch, Jakowski, Wingfield, and Romanowski that examine the effect of chronic exposure to stressors and how these effects are associated with restricted space use and altered habitat preferences in the wild. Further afield, looking at the work of Gay Bradshaw and Linda, looking at how elephants actually exhibit post-traumatic stress disorder and how these effects last decades after the event of a traumatic encounter. We look at the work of Shannon, who also looked at how acute social disruption in cognitively advanced species that live in close-knit kin-based societies also has considerable detrimental effects. And then we also see that often, in terms of how we manage elephants, we manage them on a scale that's not biologically relevant to an elephant. And so this results in significant spatial and temporal mismatches. And then we also have organizations such as the Non-Human Rights Project, which petitions for common law writ of habeas corpus for elephants and other species. Joyce has been actively involved in campaigning to free some captive elephants, as a number of others, and I'm sure that Prof. Bulchitz can speak more to that. But it just goes to show how things have evolved over time, that we are even in this day and age considering personhood for elephants. Note that personhood has been attributed to organizations, to corporations, even to a river, and so why not to elephants? Oops. So At the African Elephant Specialist Group meeting that was held in Pretoria last month, Professor Rob Slotto, who is the co-chair of the African Elephant Specialist Group, actually introduced this concept of challenging how we look and think about elephants. And these are taken directly from his slides. And I'd just like to highlight some key things that he mentioned. And he said, we have to shift away from a focus on elephant issues and management of elephants to achieve an understanding of elephants' role in society in terms of human well-being and social development. We need to understand and acknowledge societal attributes and risks. And paraphrasing quickly, he says that we need to interpret this looking at ethics, trust, culture, rights, including animal rights, in a global and holistic manner. He says that we have to do this with due respect to the dignity and rights of individuals, communities, and nations of elephants. And I think this is extremely poignant and telling about where we are today, that whereas before we were shamed as scientists to talk about the well-being and the welfare of animals, and now in a forum such as the African Elephant Specialist Group, we are now encouraged to think about things differently.